event in this room. So I would like to welcome and introduce our key participants. We have four key participants here. You only see three because one is hidden, and he's a remote participant. So we have remote participants. Yes.
He is connecting.
Yes.
We're working on it, so
Okay, so Arvin is connecting, and he will do the first short presentation. And Arvin is from Diplo Foundation. He is deeply involved in the internet governance process. He is an analyst on blockchain and cryptocurrency technology. He's curator of e-money and digital currency at the Digital Watch Observatory. And he will start with an introduction in blockchain. Then we will have Lisa to you. She is a freelance technical delivery and product manager, as well as a privacy researcher. She has an extensive experience in web and application engineering. She has also, which is very important in this respect, a background in international human and children's rights law, so she's interdisciplinary. She's also a member of the DINSPEC 4997 group that is developing best practices for privacy using blockchain. Then we will have Dr. Galia Kondova. She has worked as an economist at the World Bank. She is a lecturer at the School of Business at the University of Applied Sciences Northwestern University, where she is researching and publishing in the area of the use of blockchain for economic growth and public empowerment. Finally, we will have Anja, last not least, Anja Grafenauer. She is co-initiator of the DINSPEC 4997 working group about privacy by blockchain design, of which she will talk later on. She is an economist with a background in corporate finance. My name is Jörn Erbgut. I'm a researcher at the University of Geneva. I have a background in law and computer science, and I'm offering consultancy services on blockchain and GDPR. I'm also part of the DINSPEC working group, as well as the focus group at the ITU on distributed ledger technology. And Arvin, do we have you?
Hi, Jörn. Hi to all. Yes.
Oh, perfect. Perfect.
Yes.
So we will begin with your presentation. Can you put the first presentation on the screen?
It would be great if I could see it also. Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. So just tell us when to click.
Sorry?
For every change of slide, just say click, and we or next slide, and we.
If he has it.
Okay.
Does he have it on his computer?
Do you see the slides?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So please start.
Thank you, Jörn, and hi to all. First, to introduce myself, as Jörn just mentioned, I'm Arvin from Diplo Foundation and curator for the Digital Watch Observatory on e-money and virtual currency issue, also researcher in blockchain technology and related policy issues. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. We're going to discuss a lot of stuff, not just GDPR related, but also a kind of more privacy and individual related issues. But first of all, I had a really flattered and intuitive by Jörn in this sense to give you a fast overview or a short overview on what the blockchain technology is. You know, this is like an impossible task to explain it in a few minutes. But let's try focus on a few main points that can later be used in our discussion. So I'm sure you heard that blockchain technology is a novel technology which is developed a few years ago and promised a lot of good stuff to say, if not the cure for cancer. But as we dug deeper in history, we can actually see that this idea is not so novel. And basically, back in 1992. Here mentioned Scott Stronetta and Stuart Haber had an idea of blocks of digital data chained by cryptography to prevent tampering with the timestamp documents. This was, of course, the beginning, and the idea was to preserve the uniqueness of digital documents. That was the basic idea under this kind of cryptographically protected ledgers. But then this idea is developed further, and with the peer-to-peer networking on basic internet protocol, it's later used to create a network of computers that can collaborate and synchronize. It is harnessed, this idea of blocks of data chained by cryptography. It's harnessed to actually create an online tamper-proof database of any digital data. So let's see what are some of the main features which are also important for our discussion today. Today there are many interpretations of distributed data ledger ideas. Often prefix blockchain is added to various forms of networks, but overall main features are the following. The first, the blockchain works on a consensus mechanisms or algorithms, or let's say preset rules, in which actors in network agrees on the current state of the network without the third-party validators. Consensus-based algorithms, of course, are also not novel. Some of them, like Byzantine fault tolerance or self-stabilizing protocols, are used earlier, even 70s, 80s, in managing the large networks and reaching a consensus between the nodes in a network or users of a network. Secondly, it's a feature of immutability, and we heard about this feature a lot. Basically, data added to the blockchain cannot be altered retroactively, so back in time. Using timestamping and cryptography hash functions, timeline of data entry is going forward only. Those blockchain databases can be amended, but not retroactively changed or changed in a different way, as we will tackle that later. So immutability. Third one, of course, using cryptography for security and verification, which means that blocks of data in blockchains are chained by hash functions or cryptography, and also it uses cryptography for connecting to the network or exchanging private information over it, etc. And at the end, I put this distributed, but not decentralized. But let's explain what distributed in this sense means. It means that, in this case, there is no central place. There is no central place on which database is stored, no server on which database is stored, but rather all actors in network run the latest version of the database, matching it, synchronize it with the consensus mechanism, in place. So basically, distributed is in this sense a security feature, eliminating on a single point of entry for this databases to be down or tackled or anyhow endangered. Next slide. So, well, the main let's say, a difference, or what we can kind of say important.
Arvin, you have to change it yourself. Please take a look at the time. We are
Yes.
limited in time. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. So I just wanted to add that the main difference is, of course, type of interaction with this network. And this will later be explained in the session, and we will debate it online when we see what are the perks of open, permissionless blockchains or closed private blockchains. Just a small graphics of feature and why is, of course, this important for our today's discussion. Existing centralized structure, as we can see it on the left side, are server-based structures, and huge centralized data collections are of course one of the main threats to our privacy. In a peer-to-peer networks, computers are communicated between themselves to create the networks which can collaborate and synchronize without a single place of failure. Of course, why is this important for our discussion today? And I will finish with this one, is that peer-to-peer protocols, which is a basic of most of blockchains, is actually one of the earliest online protocols. And internet, as a miracle we're just discussing right now, the EuroDIG, is built on an open protocols, governed by the massive standardization, interoperability efforts by industry, government, civil society, academia, technical community, of course, in a multi-stakeholder model. And as we see from the main overarching theme from this year, EuroDIG, Cooperating in Digital Age, and as we see it in the last high-level panel report on digital cooperation, which is named Age of Digital Interdependence, maybe we should also think about approaching technology of blockchain in the same manner, in the sense of making infrastructure and policy effort in a multi-stakeholder model. What we heard today on the distinction between blockchain databases, interoperability, standardization efforts, and way to implement specific regulations around the most debated issue of today's internet, which is privacy. So I'm rooting for a corporation in a digital age, even when we talk about blockchains. Just to mention that I will remain in the online participation room for the discussion with you guys on a group topics that will be presented now and a bit later from the panel. Thank you, Jorn.
Thank you, Arvin. Next presentation, please. We will later on split into groups to have a more in-depth discussion, and we will also have a group for remote participants that will be moderated by Arvin. So the next presentation is about blockchain and GDPR. Can we have it? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So the question is, what is the biggest threat to privacy? Do you have an idea in your mind? What is the biggest threat?
The right to privacy.
Is this a threat to privacy?
It's technical, whether it's possible or not.
What's the biggest threat to privacy currently? Yes. Is it, or are we safe? We don't have any threats to privacy. Think about when I think about threats to privacy, I think about Facebook. I think about large collections of data that are hacked. I think about governments, organizations that spy on us. So, but what do they have in common? What is the common point of all these threats? It's basically that there are huge collections of personal data that are controlled by single actors. So to avoid this risk, so even if you have the best intentions and you have a hacker coming in, they will steal your database and your privacy is gone. So if you can avoid these centralized data stores, you can reduce the risk tremendously. But how can you do it? When you talk about decentralization, you might think about blockchain. And then comes the question, blockchain is immutable, but there is this right to be forgotten. How can we bring them together? And I think that it's not really a problem. So for example, if you, we have questions later. If you have the data set, and you create something called a hash value, a fingerprint, and you don't put the original data on the blockchain, but you put only the fingerprint that can validate the information on the blockchain. And the data is stored in some really decentralized storage that is secured. And the next data, you put it on the fingerprint also on the blockchain, but you put the data on a different place. So and so on and so on. So what does it make? Finally, you have the validation by an immutable chain. So it's not possible to manipulate the data without that you can see it. And at the same time, the data is stored in a secure place, and you can delete the data, and then the fingerprint, the hash value, cannot be used for anything else. We can discuss it. There are things you have to it's necessary to basically have the correct algorithms, to have the correct entropy, and in order that the hash value cannot be used to reconstruct the original content. But if you apply these techniques correctly, you cannot reconstruct the original content. It's not possible. And so this is being used in health data. It's being used in supply chain. It's being used at the University of Geneva to certify diplomas. And with additional privacy-enhancing technology, it's used for coins like Monero or Zcash to enable really private transaction. Bitcoin is not a private privacy coin. So this is basically the solution to the right to be forgotten, and with blockchains. So blockchains can foster privacy, and you can at the same time respect the right to be forgotten. And so this big conflict between GDPR and blockchain can be solved. There are some small remaining question, I agree, but in general it can be solved by using the technology not to put the content itself on the blockchain. But there's another problem that remains. This is solved. There's another problem. That's the problem of responsibility. And this we will focus on later. Who is controlling the system? GDPR says you need to have clear responsibilities. You have a hierarchical model of data processing with a controller, processors, and the data subject. And it does not really match a model of peer-to-peer where people are on the same level. So I've seen that there are some questions. My proposition is that we do the discussion later on, unless it's discussion. It's the question that relates directly to the short presentation. What do you think?
Yeah, we'll discuss.
My question was just answered.
Okay. Okay. So our next presentation will be Galia. She will show actually an implementation how blockchain can be used to foster privacy. Please.
So building up on what Jörg just explained, we will take the example of self-sovereign identity. We are interested in these cases that affect us as users, as individuals. And the self-sovereign identity is one possibility in which we can take advantage of all these characteristics of a blockchain and basically be in a possession of the so-called self-sovereign identity. What does that mean? It means that basically we as users, as individuals, can control our personal data. We don't have to register to have a Facebook account or a Google account and then use it as a single sign-on account, but on the blockchain we can actually control our characteristics, our credentials as we call it, to basically identify ourselves to the different entities. For example, in our interaction with banks or with the government services, commerce, retail services, healthcare, or education. At the same time, once we are in the possession of our data, we also have some responsibilities. And they are related to the fact that now we have to store our data. We also can generate and control unique identifiers, right, which now are called decentralized identifiers on the blockchain, but we have to be aware about all the consequences related to these rights that we now have, and most of them are related to privacy. So the self-sovereign identity is a possibility which empowers us to be in control of our data, but at the same time it has challenges. And the challenges are related, as I said, to the privacy issues. Now, what you cannot see quite well here in this table, but Lisa has a much better slide on that, are two different types of blockchains, models, governance models that actually provide two different possibilities for us to manage our credentials. And the first one is the so-called public permissionless blockchain, which would mean we have a blockchain where the whole public, everybody has access to it. Anybody without any permission can operate, can have the so-called decentralized identifier on the blockchain, doesn't need the permission, but the blockchain itself is reaching a consensus based on the so-called decentralized classical type of blockchain, like Ethereum would be, or Bitcoin would be such an example. An alternative blockchain that also provides us with this possibility is the so-called public permissioned blockchain. An example of that would be the Hyperledger Indy. And we also have the unlimited access to this blockchain, but the consensus takes place in a different way, which means by a consortium with a different consensus mechanism. And here I'm presenting just a slide coming from the Sovereign paper, in which you could see that actually the self-sovereign identity, as I said, is being managed on 3 different layers. And as Jorn also mentioned, only the public key of the decentralized, so-called the public decentralized identifiers are registered on the blockchain, but all the information related to our credentials is taking place off-chain, so to say, the so-called micro-ledgers, where we can actually ask an issuer to certify our credentials, and we can just present them for verification, but this takes place offline, which again solves the problem of the GDPR discussion, the privacy issue. And Lisa will have another example also on how does that work on the public permissionless blockchain, and we have some good examples, the UPort example, which comes on that. So could I just ask Lisa maybe?
Thank you, Galia. Now we go on.
Thank you.
Do we also have a portable mic?
It doesn't reach. We can change.
Because it's the cable is too short.
We can change seats.
Hello? Okay.
So the next slides. Oh, okay. Oh, this is not correct. It's not the correct one. But it's okay. I can. No, it's okay. It's okay. Go back. I will just. I will walk through it. Okay, so I'm going to just expand a bit more on this concept of self-sovereign identity, and we're just going to take a closer look at it and what it could mean in the permissionless context. So along with all of the wonderful benefits that Galia explained earlier about why we should be interested in self-sovereign identity, what does it mean for us with regards to our rights and freedom, and as well as our responsibilities, it is highly believed in the blockchain community that self-sovereign identity is actually going to be, or it is a fundamental building block and is even a defining point of the future success of blockchain-enabled innovation. So Galia also mentioned that with regards to self-sovereign identities, we create what's called a decentralized identifier. And here's an example of what it looks like. You see DID in the beginning. This stands for decentralized identifier. And in this case, ETHER is pointing to the Ethereum network, the main network. And this long number that you see there would be your public address in a blockchain network. So one question that is being asked in the identity community, these decentralized identity communities that get together and try to create standards, they ask, when can an identifier be really called decentralized? So this is a question just to consider. So here's a bit of an explanation. I will go through this pretty quickly because Galia already mentioned quite a lot about blockchains and this permissioned blockchain versus permissionless. And in permissioned blockchains, they're also called consortium blockchains. So as we already mentioned, in the consortium blockchains, there are a limited number of participants who can take part in the consensus mechanism, and they can verify transactions. So in some senses, it's considered that they may not be fully decentralized. So there are some challenges around centralized trust concept via governing authority, and the examples are what Galia explained earlier with the sovereign network, which is based off of Hyperledger Indy from IBM. Now, in the permissionless networks, there are anyone can be a participant in the node, and they can transact. And essentially, the idea behind this is because of multiple numbers of participants, high numbers, this increases the immutability of the ledgers. So in this sense, it's considered to be more fully decentralized and having an open governance model. Now, the challenges behind this have to do with privacy and transaction speed, and the examples of this are the Bitcoin and Ethereum network. So what we can see here is that in the permissioned consortium blockchains, this strategy would be to have a specialized network, perhaps based on contractual relationships, whereas in the permissionless networks, the strategies are to have a high number and diversity of nodes, and oftentimes this is based on it also has game theory-based incentivization behind it, and this leads to a high mixture of users and verifiers who are likely to support the stability of this network itself. So let me just skip real quick and come back to that because this is not the correct presentation, but ultimately with blockchains, there is the concept of trust involved because you have this certain types of participants in the network. So you either have a high number of participants who don't know each other, or you have a lower number of participants who know each other. So you also have this concept of incentivization, and these are two important factors, particularly for the permissionless networks, because there needs to be an incentive for why people will participate in the network and why they're interested in the stability of the network itself. So one thing I ask myself is, who do I trust to write my history for me? And what are their motivations? So I will go back real quick. So in blockchains, particularly in the case of permissionless blockchains, it's important to understand that essentially you're agreeing on the state of the system, and all the participants are agreeing on the state of the system, even if they don't trust each other. So this enables transactions between distrusting parties without the need for a trusted arbiter. So here's one example. In Uport, they are a provider, an identity provider based on the Ethereum main network. And here is how it would work. First, you would download the Uport mobile app, and then you would create the Uport ID, which is on the Ethereum blockchain. And then a user would request, for example, an attestation. So let's say, for example, they want to confirm that they have a university certificate. So they would request their attestation, and then the university would verify the attestation. So they are the issuer of the attestation. And then this is stored in the user's app itself. So then in the last section there, you'll see the third-party request verified attestation. So this would be, let's say, for example, an employer would verify the attestation, and then the user would present this attestation to the requesting party. And where we can see this actually happening is in the city of Zug in Switzerland. The citizens there are able to, or the residents of Zug are actually able to rent these, well, not rent actually, they're able to use these bikes free of charge in the city of Zug because their identity and their residency as residents of Zug has been verified without the need for the company Airbnb in this case, which are the bike providers, without the need for Airbnb to hold any data about them. All they understand is that they are, yes, they are a resident of the city, and so these bikes are actually free for them to use, whereas if you are a tourist in the city, you would have to pay for it. So this leads to the end. And actually, so now we are ready for the exercise portion.
Okay, for the exercise portion, we have prepared a couple of questions, and basically we have the following questions. No, no, here. What are the advantages and disadvantages for individuals and for society in using blockchain-based self-sovereign identity? Then can you imagine use cases where self-sovereign identity will provide privacy benefits? Well, this is the reason why we should do it. If there is no benefit, maybe we shouldn't do it. Then the next question is related to that. What actors will benefit from self-sovereign identity? Do we want them to benefit from it? So maybe criminals can benefit from it, but maybe we don't want them to benefit. But other actors can benefit from them as well, and we want them to benefit. And further on, should such a system have central oversight? If yes, limited to specific situations? So it's a very important question of governance. When you have such a system, when you have too much central control, it means that the central controller can do too much and has too much power, and we don't have self-sovereignty. If we have too little control, it means that bad actors cannot be removed, or bad actors cannot be addressed. So we might have a problem that when technology is not able to limit bad actors, that the system might be abused. So this is a question: how much oversight should we have? And finally, what are the main obstacles to acceptance, and how can they be overcome? These questions should have been on the slide due to.
Maybe we can get them up.
Yeah, we'll get them up in a minute. What we want to do now is we want to split in groups. We will have one remote group, which will be headed by Arwin. And we will have, since we are a small group here, we will have two groups here. And I would consider everybody here until the gentleman with the blue tie to be in the first group. And then from the lady in the yellow jacket and this side to be in the second group. And so, do you want to take the group?
Yes.
Lisa will take the second group on this side, and Gaia will take the first group, and they will be your facilitators. So please feel free to moderate yourself, to summarize yourself. They are there to assist you, to help you. But they are not deciding what you discuss. And we will have this discussion and until 5 to 3, 14:55, and then we will resume and present the results of the discussion. Any questions so far? Okay, so looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah. We'll get the questions up on the screen now, so you remember what to consider. Split up into groups of 4 again. So I will take a group over here. So we can sit on this side of the room.
The second group will be on this side, and the first group will be here. Yeah.
So now we have the correct questions up on the board or on the presentation, and so this is what we want to be discussing. So yeah, mainly these questions around so we can discuss amongst us.
So
So the blockchain-based SSI is a specific identity within the blockchain. Okay, that's what you just said. So you have multiple identifiers. Yes. You have one identity because you're just using. Yes. You have multiple identifiers that you would use. Yes. In different ways. Yes. And the goal is to achieve communication between these different cells.
So you can decide what kind of identities you want to show. For example, for somebody you might only want to show your patient identity.
Yeah.
And then you might want to show also your diploma you earned from your university. Or you might want to show that you're married. Or you might want to show that you're above drinking age. Or whatever. Maybe also your personal passport ads, but you can decide at all stages what you show. Basically, the thing that is that we always do on paper, that we can decide which papers you want to show, and there's nobody that holds all our papers. And of course, with the papers, they are all connected by the name. You can even get rid of that as well, so you don't have to select your name. But basically, it establishes the freedom we have in the paper time to select what we want the other person to know from us. So we are not able to forge any identity, any paper, any certificate, but we just have the possibility to select what we want to show.
So then this would be the benefits.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Right.
So we agree on that.
When you have a signature, you need a graphologist to prove that this is right signature. When you have a video, you will need some very experts to show that it's not fake, and in the future you will not even be able to prove that. Yeah, but they have to learn as well. So they rely on the experts.
It's trusted until there's more education and awareness.
And they trust experts, and of course this has to be established. But in principle,
At the moment, perhaps, but in the future.
it needs that I'm sorry, we need to.
But that's good. I think we've listed some benefits and some disadvantages and some clarity. I mean, the clarity on how it actually works and this is part of, I guess we could list some of the obstacles or acceptance to be able to understand all of the benefits that we really gain. So it's important that we use those, show user-friendly ways. So that should go not only with the trust factor.
Thank you very much for
I'm sorry that I have to interrupt you now. We're going to continue our plenary discussion. And please design somebody from every group to report to the plenary what you discussed and what your holdings issues are. So, Galia, for your group, who will do it? And Lisa, can you design somebody who will report?
Shall we chat now?
Yeah, please, let's resume now.
Ideas according to this.
So,
Hi, my name is Iakovina Kindilidi. I'm a lawyer. I'm from Greece, but I'm working in Lisbon. So in our group, we talked more or less about practical cases because we have people from Georgia, which was the first example, in Europe level for the use of blockchain for real estate transactions. Also Estonia for the blockchain-based identification. The problems of actually being hacked, mostly the wallets, where the information of the users were based. On a second level, we try to understand how the SSI is actually working. And we talked about the problems regarding the monopoly and actually providing the services of the SSI and who would provide them, who will be in charge of it and how they will be stored. And regarding the benefits of the technology to actually being able to take advantage of them, we focused on how people can be educated about how blockchain is working, that it's completely relevant to cryptocurrency, although people tend to intertwine it, that it's another layer of cybersecurity and privacy that it needs to be taken into account. And also to be more user-friendly, because at this point, only those who have computing power can actually access the technology, even to do a smart contract.
okay, thank you. You're welcome to come a bit closer to join the discussion later on. Lisa, you're reporting for the second group?
Yes. So it's interesting because in our group, we actually discussed also some of the benefits, the advantages and disadvantages, obstacles, and so pretty much, you know, we also talked about understanding the complexity of what's behind the technology in order to be able to, for citizens to trust. So the disadvantages that we came up with would be, gaining trust of citizens, you know, to what certain degree do they need to know how it works, and but basically the education that would then lead to them trusting and being able to use it and then feel the benefits from it afterwards. So, or even understanding the benefits ahead of time clearly as to why they should adopt this system. So we discussed also some of the benefits of it, and such as we would only have to select what we want to show to those who are interested in verifying some information about us, so we can be, you know, granular in that sense. There's also a reduction in forgery of the information that we're having verified. So yeah, I think overall this idea of having a clear understanding of advantages and disadvantages seems like it was a universal theme here.
Okay, thanks a lot, Lisa. Thank you for both groups. Arvin, do you hear us?
Yes, Jorn, I can hear you.
Do you have something to add from your group?
No, there is no remote participation. There is no one in the remote room. So I did discuss this with myself, but we'll save that for a bit later.
Okay, so what did you come up with as a result when discussing it with yourself?
There are advantages and disadvantages, and just as mentioned, our previous panelists just mentioned, it is the education might be the way of how we can step further in this endeavor, just like bringing notion of self-sovereignty or blockchain-based identity anyhow to a wider mass of people, and like working on an education on this issue. Thanks, Jon.
Okay, thank you, Arwin. So now I would like to open the discussion, and we had somebody here who just mentioned, but will courts accept those credentials, those identities? Because courts might say, well, I don't understand why this should be secure, please prove me. Then they might need to ask experts, and they first have to select experts. I think we currently in Europe we have the EIDAS legislation, and the EIDAS legislation is done for PKI, so public key encryption infrastructure. But there are discussions that are going into a direction to extend this also to blockchain-based proofs. Then this question would be solved. We had these questions. Do you think there are actors that will benefit from SSI that we don't want to benefit? Like criminals being able to have IDs without their names, but proving something that they are a member of a gang. Because criminals have one big disadvantage. They can't sue each other. It doesn't work. So they need technology that is not dependent on centralized entities. That's why they like decentralized technology. It's not necessarily because they can hide from officials, but because the current technology does not, or current systems, current administration does not offer them any support, because unless they are corrupt, of course. Anything to?
I think you mentioned also earlier about Procter & Gamble example. Did you?
Hey, yes. So, actually, it popped up when in the first question, where disadvantages for individuals, for society, but probably also for data controllers or the ones who require the data. There might also be huge benefits. And I was just talking about the use case. I'm somehow familiar with that. The company Procter & Gamble uses blockchain technology in their data protection. Managing to just show people what exactly happens with their data, and this openly based on blockchain technology, just for the sake of trust in the system. So the idea is that if you are a trusted customer or valued customer of Procter & Gamble, and you know that there are certain data with the company, you can look it up by yourself, and this will then just add to the company's renommee and good standing. Therefore, it's some kind also of a publicity effect.
Anything to add? Otherwise, there's a question about usability. Do you think we are still very far from systems that have enough usability to be accepted? I mean, people having to securely store a private key, this is a challenge. What do you think?
It took me quite a while to figure that one out, and even I am in the area. I do really believe that actually leaving up the responsibility of storing and managing the private key to users, for instance, regular users, is too much to ask at the moment. So I think this is a major issue, because compared to all the advantages you could have, just having this risk in certain cases, if we take, for instance, cryptocurrencies at the moment, or to lose it, you'd rather have someone that is centrally knowing everything about you, or potentially could know everything about you, than losing your money. That's how I see it, at least in this precise case.
Okay. Well, there are some systems that chose not to hand over the private key to the users, but to centrally administrate them, which kind of defeats the purpose. Do you think this should be done, or do you think this shouldn't be done at all?
My personal opinion is that this is quite risky because this goes into the area of surveillance, the big brother complaint that we hear in the public, centralization of data. So I think that going for a self-sovereign identity requires that the users are very well educated and that they are in a position to manage themselves their private keys. And of course, we can talk about outsourcing or storage of private keys by external providers, but then we run the risk of having this vendor lock-in problem, right? And then, again, the problem of monopolization. And there are many open issues, and I think we can also distinguish between having the blockchain running central data storages by governments for improving efficiency, and then it's another discussion of having the individuals using the blockchain for controlling their data, right? So these are the two issues, and for the individuals, I think education, as we discussed here in the group, is the most important factor.
Okay, you want to add? Basically, some days ago, Facebook announced to start a new cryptocurrency in Geneva. And when you look at what they call cryptocurrency, it's a very centralized model. So it doesn't seem to be very different from a PayPal. Germany has said we want to do a tokenization like Liechtenstein is proposing, but they say, well, we don't want to have a blockchain that is distributed. We want to have central actors, designated central actors that will have a chain where these tokens are administered. So this is not at all the blockchain idea. So we have a lot of actors that goes towards centralized control. And what do you think about this?
Oh, no, this
Well, actually, I'm not really wanting to have no firm opinion yet on your question, but I just wanted to add that, as you mentioned, that the Facebook Libra organization will be an association in Geneva. Switzerland is just right now heading towards Liechtenstein-type tokenization regulation. This is just will come into Parliament early next year, and right now its consultation is running. So I think it's from this side. I think there is everywhere there is just some gearing up on regulation on how to handle that, because most of the countries don't have.
Well, Liechtenstein has a very advantage or very has made a step forward towards a good regulation of tokens. Malta has made before a regulation of ICOs where they need to be certified. And as you said, Switzerland will copy more or less the regulation of Liechtenstein of the tokens.
or evolve.
Yeah. But do you see a lot of other countries that rely on a decentralized model? When Germany made the CDU-CSU in Germany made the proposition to copy the to base their ideas on the Liechtenstein model, basically they changed it so much that not a lot of it has remained in their proposition. So, but do we need centralized control, or do we not want it? What is your opinion? You have a microphone there? Okay. Okay.
Wait, but can you elaborate?
Well, my personal opinion, and by the way, my name is Jacques Begelinger. I'm of the Association of Large Holding Companies in Switzerland, and therefore I'm rather from the business side, and therefore I have a certain, of course, optimism that having centralized models that can be controlled by companies will, at least in their area, will bring technology forward. So while just having a total decentralized system is, let's say, on the democratic viewpoint, is certainly interesting, but there it might take some time to develop the technologies, and it's always a rather time-consuming process to find standards and so on, whilst just centrally controlled systems, they can be set up, as just Facebook showed, in a very short time. And this will bring forward probably technology, which then will help to also set up different types, decentralized types, much quicker, which in the end might be a good thing.
Okay. So I think, well, even with centralized oversight, you still have the advantage of transparency. Yeah. You mentioned the word standards, and I think standards is a very important basis for it, to reduce legal uncertainty, to make systems interoperable, to have a common terminology. And therefore I'm very happy that Anja will now elaborate on different moves for standards in this area.
Great. Can you put up the presentation? Yeah. So yeah, just to close a little bit the discussion here, we also wanted to give a little insight on what's happening at the moment in when it comes to current standardization initiatives. Just waiting for the presentation to... No worries.
Number 5.
Okay, great. Thanks. So the first worth mentioning is the work of ISO on the subject, with the Technical Committee 307 that is working on a new proposal about privacy and personally identifiable information protection. Then, at the moment, we have the German Institute for Standardization, the DIN, working on a DIN Spec 4997 about privacy by blockchain design, but I am going to elaborate a bit more on that right afterwards. I thought that what was also worth mentioning is the work of ITU at the moment. They have a focus group precisely on distributed ledger technologies, and they will also have a look at security aspects of DLTs. What I also thought was interesting is the white paper published by JPEG, which is called Towards a Standardized Framework for Media Blockchain and Distributed Ledger Technologies. And in it, it mentions that blockchain has a great potential to address, amongst others, the privacy challenge. So I'd like to dive a little deeper into the DIN Spec 4997, as I'm the co-initiator of this standard, and also working with a few stakeholders, amongst which Jörn and Lisa, who are here as well today. What are we trying to achieve here? So the goal that we're trying to reach with this first pre-standard is actually to start creating a common language between law and IT, thereby reducing legal uncertainty when it comes to personal data in a blockchain scenario. We're also trying to make things a bit easier, providing guidelines and best practices, trying to get away a bit from the theoretical and help out especially IT professionals that are trying to be, for instance, GDPR compliant. This pre-standard, we hope, will be a great foundation for further standards and regulation that are much needed, in our opinion. And as you've probably heard during the whole session, we do have the feeling that blockchain can be great to raise the levels of data sovereignty in the internet, in the online world. And that's also something that we kind of want to hint at in the standard. So just a little glimpse of the work in progress at the moment. What are we looking at in this standard? We're trying to look at personal data in a blockchain scenario. What can be defined as a personal data? How should you go about personal data when you're handling with an IT system that contains a blockchain? Then what are the risks related and that are maybe increased or potentially decreased by using DLT or blockchain? Can you maybe evaluate a bit the risk and are there like questions that you should answer before using a blockchain? Then we also want to provide some guidelines regarding technical and organizational measures to mitigate this risk that you've been considering. And since we want to also be very practical, we do have a look at GDPR tensions with the blockchain technology. And one of the outputs we want to head at is actually providing design patterns, especially, as I mentioned, for IT professionals, but also for anyone who wants to work and develop a blockchain project or using blockchain technology. And this is how it could look like. This is a draft design pattern. The idea is to have design patterns that are really starting from law and deriving from law, like the privacy by design concept that is mentioned in Article 25 GDPR, that kind of translates for IT professionals or people working on blockchain projects what they have to do, or at least like how should their system look like so that they can be GDPR compliant or greatly protecting personal data. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Anja. So, to summarize, what do you think for the whole panel? What do you think is the main takeaway from this session, or the most important thing about blockchain and privacy, especially regarding self-sovereign identity? Gaia, do you want to start?
Thank you. For me, the most important takeaway is the issue, the trade-off between user-friendliness, simplicity, and privacy empowerment by the self-sovereign identity. And this is an issue which needs to be addressed by the policymakers, and also education here is needed, different, as we said, regulations, so that actually the people are empowered to have control of their data, and also that their data is protected.
Yeah, so I totally agree with this. I have the feeling that there is still a huge lack of understanding when it comes to the issue, just generally. And there needs a huge work to be done on the general public's understanding of what is actually, what are even the risks, and how could you, help mitigate them. So I think education would be a big focus that, from my point of view. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe Arwin, do you have something to add?
Thanks, Jorn. Yeah, I would just like to echo what just Galina said, and it's really important that we should know that we can go only small steps. We can't just plunge into this and everyone understanding what's going on. And to also relate to the previous intervention from the gentleman from the Switzerland, indeed, this is the way how the innovation will move forward, and indeed, this is the way how we should all envisage the future markets. But on the and what Galina just mentioned is, do we own our own? Do we own our data? Yes, that's going to be an important question, but we have to go like small steps in that direction, explaining people how they can, how can they even practice sovereignty of their data through blockchain or any other technology, similar as we had in an offline world, to say with our taxes or with our other private data. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Arvin. Lisa?
Yes, I also echo a bit of what Galia said in regards of user-friendliness and trust in that people should have in the system of what's happening with their information, and but then the user-friendliness behind adopting new systems such as this. But we can't forget that with all the rights that we also have responsibilities in there. So this, in this case, would be responsibilities such as our private keys and storage of our data. And so this goes also along with the user-friendliness to be addressed. But I definitely think that in order to gain true agency over our identities, I need to be able to trust in whatever system is behind it. So that is, for me, this concept of a trust protocol in the system would have to be established. So, yeah, those would be my final words.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, I think in a society where technology is controlling more and more of our life, we need to control technology. And for example, when you look at deep fakes, it means that we cannot trust traditional media anymore. We cannot trust paper anymore. We cannot trust video anymore. We cannot trust audio anymore. So it's not just the actors, but it's a conventional means of proof that we cannot trust anymore. So we need something that we can trust, that cannot be forged by a single actor, and that we can control so far as it refers to us. This is the reason why we need a technology that is trustworthy, that provides trust beyond one single actor. We have all been betrayed by single actors. There has been corruption in many places, so we need something that is based on more than a single actor. And we need our sovereignty in these kind of systems. So I think self-sovereign identity is a very important a cornerstone for our future digital society. Let me please give the final words to Julia. She will present the summary for the EuroDIG conference.
Thank you. So I was, as a reporter from the Geneva Internet Platform, we are writing key messages, and then a report will be available on the session on the website. And the key messages will be shared with the panel for further comments and with the community. So please bear with me while I read the 5 messages. And then you can say yay or nay, agree, disagree, or hum, or in any way express your thoughts on yes or no. So first message. Internet is built on the open protocols governed by the massive standardization and interoperability efforts by industry, governments, civil society, academia, and technical community in a multi-stakeholder model. We should approach blockchain technology in the same manner by enhancing the efforts to develop both infrastructure and policies. Okay, not okay? Problems with it?
I don't remember having discussed it, but I agree with it.
We opened, Arvin opened with it, so I tried to follow from start to end. But of course you can make comments.
Second message, the biggest threat to privacy is the huge collection of personal data that is controlled by single actors. By using the blockchain technology and its immutable chain secured by the hash, we can avoid the centralization of data, therefore reducing the risks to privacy and also respecting the right to be forgotten. Is that okay?
I would add a little bit of in the phrasing with because the hash is not just used for the blockchain itself, but it's also used to make the connection, to make the proof.
Of course, but
so
yeah, you can edit the wording.
Yeah, but in general, yes,
delete
of course.
and so. In regards to our rights, freedoms, and responsibilities, the self-sovereign identity is coming forward as the fundamental building block and a defining point of the future success of blockchain-enabled innovation. We should focus more on understanding the place of trust and trustworthiness beyond one single actor. Okay, not okay? No thoughts? Next one, we should put greater focus on advancing awareness and education about the complexity behind the self-sovereignty identities in particular and the blockchain technology in general. Education should be complemented by regulation, particularly addressing the issue of the trade-off between user-friendliness, simplicity, and privacy empowerment by the self-sovereign identities. It's also mentioned. Okay, not okay.
You put in the regulation. We need regulation, but not necessarily at this point. What do you think?
It was brought by, it was brought forth by Gali.
Okay, so if you
again, you can make comments on
no,
this.
I'm fine.
For editing.
It's a detail, but
you can agree as a panel.
Sure. Okay, so we go with it.
You can discuss further and then edit. You will have time for
okay.
that. And the last one, developing standards could help create a common language between law and the information technologies. This would reduce legal uncertainty around the use of personal data within blockchain-based systems.
Aye.
Yes, Arvin.
I'm just saying I'm agreeing with this one.
Okay, good to hear you. Voice from the back. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, so if there are no factual mistakes, then this will be submitted for, of course, further editing from your side and then distributed. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuya, for this great summary. Thank you, all the key participants for making this workshop possible, and thank you for all of you attending it and also contributing to the workshop, because it's you played a very important role in the discussions to make this possible. Thank you very much. You can find our contact details in the wiki if you have further questions. We are happy to hear from you if you have further questions or want to relate to it. Thank you.